This is a tutorial on the Residential Purchase Agreement, a universal form that can be used in any state to purchase real estate. Now, if you're looking for a realtor form or California Realtor Purchase Agreement, I will link in the description to a different tutorial on a different channel that has tutorials on realtor forms and realtor topics. And I will link to this form, this particular form, in the description, and of course our form editor as well, where you can log in, build a transaction, import all these independent real estate contract forms and edit them and then export them so they look just like this. And of course that'll all be in the description. Now, for this form, we start by putting the date that we drafted up top here on the left. So this is the date that we're drafting the form, then the name of the buyer or buyers. And you'll see I filled this out with sample information just as an example, but we put one buyer's name. Of course, we can put multiple here. Property address, city, state, zip, county, assessor's parcel number, which I like to think of as a social security number for property, because this is what the county uses to assign an identification number to a piece of real estate so that they can levy property taxes. And this is used just to identify the property. Now you can find this on a property tax bill, or you can find it on the assessor's website. And if you really can't find it, just leave it blank and you can always come back to it in the future. Purchase price, I just put $800,000 in numerical format here on line 7, but then I rewrite it in text format down here on line 9. And this is just for redundancy purposes to make sure there's no typo that erroneously states the wrong amount. So having both of these here just ensures it's less likely we're going to have any sort of issue with the sales price. Now we put the close of escrow. You can put a definitive calendar date here on line 10 or a number of days after acceptance right here. I just wrote 30 because that's a fairly typical escrow period. All right, now we go down to representation. Now, of course, if there is no agent representing one side or no agent at all, you can just write NA or not applicable or leave it blank. But in this case, we have agents involved. So we put the name of the brokerage representing the seller. Then we put the name of the individual representing the brokerage, so the agent or individual broker. So we have ABC Realty and then Annie Agent from ABC Realty representing the seller. Same thing with the buyer. We have the name of the brokerage, then the buyer's agent's name. Then we come down to finance terms, and we start by putting the earnest money deposit. This is how much the buyer is going to deposit into escrow within 3 days from acceptance. That's typically between 1% and 3% of the sales price. I just wrote in $10,000. Of course, 1 to 3% in this case would be $8,000, would be 1%, $24,000 would be 3%. But you get the idea. It's just some number around there. Now, if this was an all-cash offer, I would click this button, but it's not. We're going to take a loan out. The buyer's putting 20% down, so they're getting a loan for $640,000. That's 80% of $800,000. And by default, this is a conventional loan. Of course, if it was FHA or something else, we would just check these boxes. And if there was a second loan, we'd put that here. Then we put the remainder of the down payment. So what is the down payment? Well, the down payment is $160,000, but we already have $10,000 in escrow. That's the earnest money deposit. So we just put $150,000. So that's basically the whole down payment minus the earnest money deposit. And then we reconcile all this on line 27. If you add all these numbers up, it should equal the total purchase price. So that's just another way of making sure that all of our numbers are reconciled and are correct. Then we come down to a new section. This is new for 2024. And this is in part because of all this commotion from the NAR settlement. Now, this form is intended for people that aren't subject to NAR restrictions, but there is a lesson that can be learned, and that's just about transparency and who exactly is paying for which commission. So here we have this new commission section. Now, we're putting in here 3 different options of different parties that can pay the buyer's agent commission. So if you check this box seller or seller's broker, which is the listing agent in other words, or even the buyer, shall pay the broker representing the buyer, so the buyer's agent, and we can put in 2.5% of the sales price. I just wrote in 2.5%. You can write in whatever you want. This is a proposal, just like the purchase price is a proposal. But in the future, especially in realtor transactions, the commission is going to have to be addressed somewhere. It's going to be on a purchase agreement or related forms. But until the dust settles from all the change up with NAR members, it's important that things like this are out in the open and addressed so that there's a seamless transition into the future. So I put 2.5%. Now, of course, seller's broker, this is identical to what's happening now. This is already how it works. If it's listed on the MLS, if this property happened to be on the MLS, that's the same thing. The seller's broker is paying 2.5% or whatever's on the MLS. It's just affirming on a purchase agreement what's already known. Now, you can do a flat fee instead, or you can do one of these, percentage or flat fee, and something else. Now, I just wrote in $400 transaction coordinator fee, just to show you what an and looks like. Or it could be $500 for photography reimbursement. I mean, you can put whatever you want there, but the point is there's an and section. And if this doesn't perfectly encapsulate what you're trying to do, you have additional terms, all these blank lines that you can just fill out with whatever you want. Then down here, both parties are going to initial, and we move on to the next page. So by default, the buyer needs to show proof of funds and lender verification when applicable. Of course, you can change the 3-day requirement. Really, proof of funds and lender verification should accompany an offer when it's submitted to the seller's agent. But if it's not available for whatever reason, you have 3 days from acceptance, and you can put in a different number here. You can put 7 days if you want, if you really need more time. Now we get down to transaction costs. So the first is relating to smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, and water heater bracing. And I just have, the seller really should pay for this because it's not necessarily pay, it's that the seller's responsible for it. Because is a buyer in escrow going to go into a home that they don't own and start doing these repairs? And if they're not done properly, the seller could be liable. So it's silly. The seller really should do this every time. So that's why I checked this box. Now down here we have more vague areas because these vary state by state. But we have either party can pay for the following reports. And I put in property inspection, but you can put in 4-point inspection. You can put in, roof, sewer, septic, whatever you want. You can just write it all in here, one after another. Just put a comma in between. Termite's fairly common. So we have a whole line for termite inspection, and I have the seller paying it by the seller's choice. Of course, write this in however you see fit. Let the parties negotiate it out. Then we have some more blank lines. So you can put in whatever wasn't already described up above here. Now, for title insurance, this, of course, varies all over the place, and different parties pay different areas have different parties paying the owner's title policy. In Southern California, the seller usually pays, so I checked the seller box, and I wrote in the title company name. Then I wrote in that both parties are splitting the escrow fee. Of course, this is negotiable, and it's customary in terms of how it's usually done in certain areas. Now, you can write in the escrow company name if it's different, but I just checked the box that the escrow company is the same as the title company. This means that Super Title's escrow division is going to be the escrow company. And then, of course, if any of this is applicable, you'll check these boxes. Is there a county transfer tax? Is there a city transfer tax? Are there HOA fees? Is the seller going to buy a home warranty for the buyer? If that's the case, put a max number that the seller is going to be willing to pay for a home warranty. Let the buyer choose. That's the easy way to go. Buyer's choice. The buyer's the one that's going to have to call the 1-800 number, the customer service line, when their water heater goes out. Let them choose what company they have to deal with, so they can't blame the seller for choosing the lousiest company with the worst customer service. Now we have all these other wonderful empty lines where you can put anything that wasn't explicitly mentioned. Maybe if there's a certain transfer tax that is local to your area, whatever it may be, check the box and write it in right there. Then both parties initial, we move on. Now, real property typically is items that are affixed to the premises. So when you have built-in appliances, when you have planted a tree in the ground, when you've attached curtains to the wall, that's included in real estate. And it's mentioned here just to give an idea, but just for the sake of being as clear and open about your intentions of what you expect and to be conveyed in the sale, you can check these boxes here about what's included. And you can also even add it here if it's not going to be, if something is that you want something included that may otherwise not be included, like maybe the tree that's in that pot in the front and that the flower or the planter for the tree would otherwise be taken by the seller, but you'd like it to stay because it's such a perfect fit. Whatever it may be, you can write it in right there. Wall mounts, add the television if you want, just an idea. All right, and then there's some verbiage about lease items because of solar. Now don't worry, if there are special scenarios or circumstances that aren't explicitly mentioned, there's plenty of blank space to write it in. Now, by default, there's a loan contingency. And you have 21 days for the loan contingency to be in place automatically. And if it's let's say a cash purchase, you can say no loan contingency, or you can change how many days there is for loan contingency. We're going to leave it 21 for now. And then appraisal contingency. By default, there's a 17-day appraisal contingency or no appraisal contingency, especially if there's a cash purchase. They're not going to have an appraisal. Inspection, same idea. Both parties initial at the bottom of this page and every other page. 70 days for inspection, investigation, or no inspection contingency. I would not recommend checking this box ever. You can shorten 17 days for inspection down to 7 or 3 if you have some cash investor that's highly seasoned, but I would not recommend waiving the inspection contingency. And then the seller has 7 days to deliver disclosures to the buyer. And then there's rights to cancel and seller's right to cancel. Basically, if one of the parties breaches the contract, and it tells you exactly what to do and how to do it if one party wants to cancel on another. Then we have both parties initialing, we move on. Closing and possession, by default, this is the buyer's primary residence. If it's not, check this box. We're on line 160, that the buyer does not intend to occupy the property. Maybe it's an investment property. And property is going to be delivered on the day of recording at 6 p.m. Or you can put in, maybe the seller is going to stay in for 3 days or something like that. You can write that in there. 3 days after closing, you write in those exact words. Now this talks about dispute resolution down here. And basically it says that both parties agree to go to mediation. And this is just for the sake of saving the headache of litigation, avoiding it if they can, and saving the money that it costs to go through litigation and hiring an attorney. Mediation is the first remedy for legal disputes. And there's an optional section for arbitration. And this is if mediation, which is just talking it out basically with a mediator playing referee, if that doesn't resolve the issue, well, it can escalate to arbitration where that referee then has a legally binding opinion. So both the parties can state their case again, and then an arbitrator, someone like a retired judge, for example, makes a arbitrator's ruling that basically is legally binding. So again, this is trying to avoid just flat out going to court and spending a bunch of money on attorneys. Now, if you want to do arbitration in case mediation fails, the parties initial here. If they don't initial here, then they're waiving this arbitration clause. Now, these are advisories and other disclosures that are good measure and in some cases obligatory to disclose. So we have these in here. And the party's initial, we move on. Of course, you can read through all this, but it's boilerplate text that just makes this form a little bit better because of those advisories. And then we have finally down here, so like wire fraud warning, there's an example. A warning to our clients, to parties in a transaction, that wire fraud is prevalent at settlement companies and to look out for it. So, and it gives you instructions on what to do. And then this also protects you as a real estate professional because you've delivered to your client this document which informs them what to look out for. So that's why it's a good measure. And additional terms, what did we not cover that you want to add to this form? And you have this space here to put it in. Now, if the buyer signs this form and delivers it to the seller and the seller ignores it, well, this automatically voids 3 days after the buyer has signed it. And you can change that to even sooner. You can change it to 1 day or something like that and really put the pressure on the seller to decide if they want to move forward. The buyer's going to sign it, and the buyer is going to deliver it. Now, the seller is going to either accept it or counter it if they decide to proceed. And if they do counter, they need to check this box here. No matter what, the seller has to sign this form, even if they counter. But by checking this box, it means they agree to this, but on the condition that the changes in the counteroffer are incorporated into the agreement. That's what that means. Seller's going to sign, and then both the brokers are going to put in their information here. Pretty straightforward. And then finally, we have the escrow holder, and we have the space for the escrow holder to put their information and both parties to acknowledge who the escrow holder is, how they're licensed, and all the escrow holder's information. And that's it. That is the Universal Purchase Agreement. Check out the description for links and more information. If you need access to the form editor, if you need access to this form, please leave a comment or contact openhometeam.com, and I'll make sure that you get taken care of. Thanks so much for watching.